Thank you, Professor Pandey, Professor Giri, Professor Anand Kumar, and friends. I do not know how to begin because of three constants. I have read Professor Pandey's earlier publication, and I have listened to him today. I came to know about Sharan's existence in Indian sociology when I was a student of Buddhism at Bodh Gaya. And that was not from a Buddhist, it was from a book, my first book in sociology by Ramakrishna Mukherjee, Sociology of Indian Sociology, in 1979. And before I joined as a classmate of Ananta Giri in Delhi School of Economics in 1984, I tried to meet Professor Saran through three great people. One was Kamlesh Shukla, second was Professor Tiwari. Both are well known to Professor Anand Kumar. And then I decided to include sociology within my training process. Before that, I was a student of Buddhism. I had already got initiation in Buddhism in 1975. When I met him, I was silent and he was speaking. And as Professor Pandey has also said, I thought I am not a Supatra to probe his mind. I asked only three simple questions. Number one, why you are so angry, sir? Now that was the time of Amitabh Bachchan in Indian cinema, and I did not understand why people call him angry young man. The real angry young person on the one hand was A.K. Sharan, always angry, and the other was Indira Gandhi. She was a youth icon in 1969, and by 74, youth movement started against her. Professor Anand Kumar has been part of this history. But now I have a different view altogether, which is not in contradiction with what Veena Das wrote about him in Critical Events when she compared A.K. Sharan with Louis Dumont. Or, I have nothing to say about dismissal of sociology community, sociological community at large today. But I would like to just draw your attention to three simple facts. Number one, when you are a courageous person, a moral person, it is not very easy to digest an altogether new view, different view. And what was his problem? Number one, that he was angry that why Indian sociologists of Lucknow, Delhi, and Bombay we are not taking the beginning of Indian sociology seriously. To make it more simple, why D.P. Mukherjee and G.S. Ghurye, Radha Kamal Mukherjee, and Kapadia Chattopadhyay, even Nirmal Bose, we are not making a dialogue with B.K. Sarkar, B.N. Seal. Now, Saran has not written much about it, but in my personal conversation, he said very, very explicitly, I have three problems, and that is the source of my anger. Number one, people have blindly accepted the erroneous view propounded by Immanuel Kant that reality in itself or noumena cannot be understood. In other words, he was against phenomenology of social sciences, whether it is practiced in India or elsewhere. He was a traditional person. Yes, initially he was a traditional Hindu. But when he came in contact with Buddhism at Sarnath, Tibetan Higher Institute Sarnath, he also came in contact with, the Shia scholar Sayyid Hussain Nasr in 70s. And this Tibetan Buddhist and the Shiite scholars, the group around Sayyid Hussain Nasr in Iran, opened his eyes, and he had moral courage to engage with three people at the same time. One was the legacy of Kumar Swami, which had been already presented. The second was his critical conversations, engagements with D.P. Mukherjee. But the third was a structural transformation in the ontology, epistemology, methodology, and substantive work on civilizations in Radha Kamal Mukherjee. Radha Kamal Mukherjee began with normal Western sociology, but by 60s he was transformed, and many people have not written about him, whether it is Yogendra Singh or T.K. Women's edited book on Indian sociology, or even Ramkrishna Mukherjee. They just at best mention the bibliography, but 5 works of Radha Kamal had a very important positive or negative influence on Sharan, and these books were Symbolic Life of Man, Decline of Civilization, Destiny of Civilization, and Cosmic Art of India. Fifth was a critique of nature and culture in his earlier book on ecology. Although, because of personal reasons, since Radha Kamal and D.P. Mukherjee were not talking much in the same department, pragmatically, Sharan decided, like Professor D.P. Mukherjee and D.N. Majumdar and T.N. Madan, to ignore the later achievements of Radha Kamal. Instead, he was trying to make friendship with Heidegger. Nobody mentions either Heidegger or Nietzsche in the development of either European classical sociology or Indian sociology until 1990s. But Heidegger is a very important influence on A.K. Saran. Why? Because at one end, he was making a lethal critique of Immanuel Kant and his, Kantian revolution in philosophy or social sciences at par with Copernican revolution, that we cannot study reality as it is, that is beyond the techniques, methods, theories, paradigms available to social sciences anywhere. But most European scholars, primarily those who are working in other languages like Danish, German, French, and Polish, and Russian, they were taking this philosophical breakthrough very seriously. Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Heidegger on the one hand, and Schopenhauer on the other. And they were trying to get the source of Gandhi, William Morris, John Ruskin, and Tolstoy. Therefore, I think we are yet to begin a systematic study of A.K. Saran, because literature is not easily available. Of course, we have 10 volumes published from Sarnath, and there are many papers available at Lucknow and with Professor Pandey. It requires an intellectual project to understand A.K. Saran, because he writes in 3 languages. The normal language of sociology is one. Second is the mythic language, which was studied by Levi-Strauss in his, later period, his books on myths and mythologies. And third is he is using the metonymy, or metanoia and autology. I will explain in few minutes what I have written when Professor Pandey was reading his paper. I will come to the first, my assessment of A.K. Saran. This is point 4 in my note of Professor Pandey's presentation. A.K. Saran was a classical sociologist of comparative civilizations. But besides G.S. Ghurye, his book Cities and Civilizations, and 3 volumes by Radha Kamal Mukherjee, other Indian sociologists had settled to study either the nation state or the partitioned society of India. A.K. Saran rightly disagreed. He said that you cannot study India as a civilization without making a serious engagement with what is called SAARC countries. Because the Indian history is not necessarily the history of nation state, and in a civilization there are 4 elements. People talk only about 2, nation state and civil society. But since he had, engaged with Herbert Spencer, he brought the concept of military society as a complementary concept of civil society, and then he said state versus the market. Therefore, he said, although it is not very neatly articulated in Saran, but I have written it in my Hindi publications, Hind Swaraj ki Prasangikta, Bharatiya Sanskriti ka Swaroop, Indology in India as a discipline, and Indology as a method in Indian sociology, and my paper about, study of Indian civilization. Therefore, those who are interested, they can refer to that. Here I wanted to stress that what makes Saran different was not only his engagement with modernity and tradition, but his emphasis that we should make civilization as the starting point of social science enquiry. Traditionals as well as moderns. A.K. Saran was a classical sociologist of comparative civilizations, traditionals as well as moderns, at the end of his career. Second, his ontology is already well-established methodology of theory production in classical sociology. However, it is mostly implicit or known by different names. For example, ontology of A.K. Saran is homologous to biography in sociological imaginations of C. Wright Mills. B. It is social actors' Verstehen in Max Weber's historical sociology of law. C. It is emic view in social anthropology. D. It is Indology in sociology of Louis Dumont. D. It is being in Heidegger and post-structuralist. E. It is Westology in J.P.A. Suberai. F. It is West in us in Rabindra Raj in the European shadow. G. It is thinker in Kishore Mahbubani's Can Asians Think? H. It is the self in Hamid Dasabi's Can Non-Europeans Think? Then A.K. Saran was a camp follower of A.K. Kumar Swami's Sociology of India. Ramakrishna Mukherjee, in his Sociology of Indian Sociology, outlined the contributions of Kumar Swami as one of the founding fathers of Indian sociology, with B.K. Sarkar, G.S. Ghuriye, Radha Kamal Mukherjee et al. And my last point is that A.K. Saran was the conscious pioneer of Westology in India, who collaborated with Marco Pallis, Syed Hussein Nasr, Dharampal, and Samdong Rinpoche. I think I should end because I have made, my points in the limited time allotted to me. Thank you. Under provocation, I will add one more line. The thing is that time and space as primary category of civilizational analysis is central in social sciences, but it is taken for granted. For example, time for Max Weber is money. Time is money. He borrowed it from Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin borrowed it from Calvin. But for A.K. Saran, for Syed Hussein Nasr, for His Holiness Dalai Lama, for many new people, for example, Ivan Illich, Pope Francis, time is not money, rather time is a dimension of divinity, and this dimension cannot be understood without a space. A space for most European sociologists is inert, lifeless. But for non-Europeans, Earth is the extension of goddess body. Whether, it is Tara of Buddhism or Tripur Sundari of Sakta Sampradaya, or Kamakshi of South Indian Dravidian Hinduism, or Durga of North India. Therefore, space and time, as concepts for Saran and the Westerners in Indian body, is qualitatively different and it should be taken seriously. Third, for A.K. Saran, civilization did not consist only of four elements, that is, the military society, the civil society, the market and nature and nation state. But he also said that there are at a higher level three elements of any civilization: qua-civilization. He did not consider that modernity has been able to produce a civilization. At best, it is an empire, it is some sort of settlement. Modernity can produce only settlements like United States of America or New World. Civilization is not possible without cumulative accounting of human wisdom. And this is there in Horkheimer and Adorno's dialectics of civilization as well. Therefore, I will not say A.K. Saran is something very unique in the global village. He is one of the very important voices who can champion the cause of multicultural global village, multiple modernities, plural ways of expressing the same thing, what Kumar Swami articulated in figures of speech and figures of thought. It was just a response to my friend. I end here because then, and if I am allowed 5 minutes, I have the following to say. Number one, in Tantric vision of civilization, there are three elements. One is nature, second is being, and there are 84 lakhs of human forms or jiva, and third is divinity. Therefore, nature, being or jiva, Jeev, and divinity or Brahma. Now, this is not unique to only Hindu Tantra or Sufi Tantra or I must say Buddhist, Shakt, Sufi, but also it is a very important element of Jewish cosmology, and they call it Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism, primarily associated with the Orthodox Church. This is number one. Second, there are technical terms which we have to translate in modern language of social sciences. For example, what is mantra? The usual translation by Orientalists and Indologists is that mantra is a formula. I think this is wrong. And there is a book, The Treasury of Traditional Wisdom, which bridges this gap which my friends were talking about. And what is mantra in any traditional community called religion, in Durkheimian term? Mantra is the theory of energy, primarily sound energy at four levels: para, pasyanti, madhyama, and vaikhari. And it is not only limited to Shaktas, but also to Sufis. For example, in Al-Ghazali, in Rumi, the Buddhist Nagarjuna Sarhapad, who bridges the gap between the Nath Panth and Bajrayan, Machendranath, Gorakhnath, Jalandharnath, etc. Therefore, we have to understand that in traditions of every variety, it is the community which is the unit of analysis and not man or family. Therefore, Ferdinand Tönnies' book, Community and Society, should be the first social science work to negotiate truth and not reality. All traditions engage with truth and not social reality or reality. What is the difference between truth and reality? Truth is Brahma, or ultimate reality, or noumena, which can be studied as empirical reality plus possibilities in sadhana, tantra yoga. And for Levi-Strauss, this possibility is model building. Therefore, we have two tasks. One, to study the so-called modern or post-traditional landscape or telos, but also to study, comparative civilizations or settlements or formations, social formations, where a different type of perspective called epistemology or methodology is involved. For example, for modern people, humanism is a very great idea. But in case you call a traditional Muslim or traditional Buddhist or traditional Russian Orthodox Church person or to a traditional Hindu, it is the greatest insult or abuse you are capable of, inflicting on the person. And second thing is, first is mantra, that is theory of energy, many energies, but primarily sound energy. And what is Tantra? Tantra is technology of energy. And what is Yantra? Which is the primary tool of Tantra? Instruments. Yantra is instrument, or Yantra are instruments to preserve and promote energy fields in the living beings. Now, this is, the second point. The first point is that there are, three elements in traditions where time and space can be understood from traditional perspective. That is, time in nature, time in the being, time in the divinity. Second, there are four types of languages which traditional people speak. One is Bakhari, the spoken word or written word. Second is symbolic language or mythic language. Third is transcendental communication without medium. And fourth is communication with silence. His Holiness the Dalai Lama had given some lectures on this at Harvard University long back. Now, the last thing which I would like to draw your attention to is that in case you are engaged with this question from Tantra Yoga point of view, you should read the Kashmir person. His name is Abhinav Gupta. And primarily, he has many works, but I will recommend, Tantra Sar or Tantra Lok. Two books are much more important than others. I think stop here. I have one objection. I was not the speaker. There was one presentation, and I was just a discussant, and I should be treated as the footnote to Professor Pandey's already circulated paper. I have serious objection. I was not the speaker. I was not the presenter. I just provided the footnote to Professor Pandey's very beautiful, eloquent, sophisticated presentation, and it is this injustice should not be done to me. Today was the day of Professor Pandey, and I was just the footnote. Yes, I agree with you that Sharan's critique of modernity will not apply to Sri Aurobindo and also Chittaranjan Das of Odisha. for two reasons, because these people were, doing independent meditations on space, time, life, and civilization. And they use a terminology which is not necessarily, conditioned by the university syllabuses. Therefore, for example, when you are reading Savitri of Sri Aurobindo, I think both tradition and modernity become not only complementary to each other, but it is like a Yugal Bandi of Tabla and Sarod. I think both are open-ended, tradition and modernity, but the basic difference between, J.P.S. Suberai on the one hand and Kumar Swami on the other is that J.P.S. Suberai and many like him think that modernity can be understood only through the language of science, physics, Newtonian physics, for example. But Sharan thinks like Kumar Swami and many other people, which has been mentioned as the camp follower, that it is art which is more capable, exemplary subject of a study or object of a study than science, because art is, a symbolic whole, the sacred, which also includes science and technology or craft as an element. Therefore, for Sri Aurobindo, art, for example, a novel or epic or literature, it is not a description of reality or truth, but rather the symbolic representation of Pind in Brahmand. I'm sorry, Ananta. JPS always said that Goethe was primarily a scientist. Out of 10 books, 9 books are in botany and only one book is the book of poetry. Whereas in the case of Isaac Newton, there are 40 books and 39 books are in the field of Christian theology, and Principia Mathematica is the 40th book. That is, one book out of 40 is in science, and therefore this is the classification of Goethe as a poet and Newton as a scientist that is problematic from the point of view of traditionalists like Saran, Nasr, Marco Pallis, René Guénon, Count Kesserling, Tilio Tolstoy, John Ruskin, et al.